Israel says it's easing the blockade of Gaza. Palestinians maintain this is not enough and insist the siege be totally lifted. Can those making this demand capitalize on unprecedented international pressure to achieve that end? And will more planned aid flotillas bound for Gaza help or hinder? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. US envoy George Mitchell met with Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak on Saturday to discuss the ongoing political deadlock in the Middle East. The meeting also tackled efforts to lift the Israeli siege imposed on Gaza since Hamas took control of the Strip. Egypt was the latest stop for Mitchell on his current tour of the region. On Friday, he met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah. That meeting came after what Israel described as a decision to ease the blockade. This in turn following an international uproar when a Gaza-bound aid ship was attacked by Israeli forces last month, leaving 9 dead. President Abbas, however, reiterated that the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip must be completely lifted. That opinion echoed in Gaza itself by the deposed government there.
The Israeli decision was to ease the international pressure and to circumvent the international demand for ending the siege completely. We, as the Palestinian people and an Arab and Islamic nation, are still maintaining our position, which is to lift the siege completely, land, sea and air, from the Gaza Strip, and the people will not accept anything less than that.
And US President Barack Obama has asked for what he calls a new conceptual framework to replace Israel's blockade of Gaza. He then went on to say, and I quote, "And so there should be a means by which we are able to stop the flow of arms that could endanger Israel's security. At the same time, we're doing so in a way that allows the people in Gaza to live out their aspirations and their dreams, both for themselves and their children." Well, joining me to discuss the topic in Ramallah, Sabri Saidam, advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas. In Tel Aviv, Ephraim Snee, a retired general and the chairman of the Stanley Daniel Abrams Center for Strategic Dialogue. And in London, Dr. Rosemary Hollis, Middle East specialist at City University. Let's start in Ramallah with Sabri Saidam. How significant is the Israeli cabinet decision in terms of actually making lives better in Gaza?
Well, if Israel was serious about making life easier in Gaza, it would end the occupation of Gaza. Instead, Israel keeps maintaining that it has withdrawn from Gaza. On the contrary, it has redeployed, it has destroyed every source of life coming into Gaza, and the most hurt are the ordinary Palestinians. So I think the move is totally insignificant. It bears no fruit whatsoever, and I think it will be just like another attempt on the part of the Israeli government to press an interest or to show an interest, to say the least, that it is doing something, while it is doing nothing but lifting the moral siege that's imposed on Israel after its combat of the Turkish ship.
Well, Ephraim Snee in Tel Aviv, how does the Israeli public view this cabinet decision? Is it seen as a back down resulting from international pressure?
I think that we missed the point. The point is not which goods exactly are crossing the border between Israel and Gaza. The question is who governs Gaza, who controls Gaza. And today it's Hamas, it's a terrorist organization which turned Gaza to a launching pad of rockets and missiles. And as long as this is the character of the regime in Gaza, we will not allow arms and strategic goods to enter Gaza. The problem is how people who are the legitimate government of the Palestinian people will govern Gaza, and not a band of proxies of Iran, terrorist organization, who, just to remind you, sir, took power 3 years ago with a brutal coup exactly 3 years ago, killing many innocent people, including many of Mr. Saidam's colleagues from Fatah movement.
But we did hear from a spokesman for the president of the Palestinian Authority, those that you say that are the rightful leaders of the Palestinian people, saying that the siege must be totally lifted.
What should be removed is the Hamas regime. When there is no Hamas regime, there is no problem. Because I will tell you, I remember when I was Deputy Minister of Defense and there was no Hamas regime, it was before the coup of the Hamas, 750 trucks per day cross the border back and forth with everything. What happened is that the takeover of Hamas imposed on Gaza what you called the siege. They can't manage a regime of the Shabab in Mogadishu and enjoy the life of Doha or Abu Dhabi or Dubai. It doesn't go together.
Well, Dr. Hosni Mubarak in London, let's just get your opinion on this. Let's just stay with the initial point. How significant do you think that this Israeli decision to what it calls easing the blockade truly it is in terms of the humanitarian impact in Gaza?
I think you can say that the flotilla episode and the raid on the Navy Marmara has drawn attention to a situation which has been going on for 3 years. In fact, the blockade really began as of the Hamas election victory in January 2006, when you had members of the international community going along with the Israelis on the notion that because Hamas was designated a terrorist organization, it would not be possible for the European Union or the United States to deal with them in the same way that they now deal with the administration in Ramallah. And as of that, the European Union and the United States have been in something of a debate about whether it's appropriate to have a blockade on Gaza, which is quite as comprehensive as it has been, as a method for somehow bringing down the Hamas regime. And the word repeatedly used by the European Union in criticizing the blockade is that it is counterproductive. It is actually hurting the wrong people. And latterly, as of the flotilla episode, you've had the United States and the Europeans saying it's unsustainable. So what they're looking for is not just an easing of the blockade on some foodstuffs and some concrete and other building materials going to UN schools and building of other facilities. What they're looking for is a rethink of the logic of the blockade.
Well, Ephraim Snee in Tel Aviv, we heard there a rethink of the blockade itself, but we've also heard from the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, saying that in fact this amounts to collective punishment and it is illegal in terms of international law. Your response to that?
Look, it's a diversion of from the truth. It's true. The population in Gaza, 1.5 million people, they are punished collectively by the fact that the terrorist organization, Hamas, took over by force the regime, kicked brutally by killing and expelling their political opponents, brutally took over the place, and yes, the population in Gaza, they are the victims.
Well, Sabri Saidam in Ramallah.
Just to remind you, in September '05, Israel evacuated Gaza, destroyed all the settlements. There is no single settler or soldier on Gaza, and the Hamas, instead of turning it to a place of development and prosperity, invited Iranian arms, rockets, missiles, and turn it to a basis of aggression. The victims are the people of Gaza. And I hope that sooner than later, they will be relieved of this regime.
Well, Sabri Saidam in Ramallah, what's your opinion of that point of view from Ephraim Snee? The victims are the people of Gaza and the cause is the actions of Hamas.
Well, Ephraim Snee is the very person who knows that Israel has never evacuated Gaza. Israel has redeployed its forces out of Gaza. It has destroyed the airport. It has closed all crossings. And let me take you back to the days when the Palestinian Authority existed in Gaza. It's totally untrue that the blockade was lifted. There was very limited lorries going into Gaza, and the movement and the passage of people in and out of Gaza was near impossible. And going from Gaza to the West Bank was almost blocked. So I wonder how on earth would people consider the people of Gaza or the people of Palestine at large as living the life of people living in Geneva. If anything, Israel would have to reconsider its ethics and would have to revisit its policy of occupation. This occupation as a whole is totally unsustainable, and this policy of aggression cannot continue unhindered. Let me also remind Ephraim that we have not appointed Israel as an attorney on behalf of the Palestinians. We, the Palestinians, are now striving for unity, and we, the Palestinians, are saying collectively that it is time that the blockade on Gaza is lifted. And he knows quite well that the tunnel business is maybe furnishing the authority of Hamas with the needs it requires, but the Palestinian people, the very ordinary Palestinian people, are the very people who are hurt. He knows quite well as to how many Palestinians need treatment in the West Bank, cannot get permits to cross. He knows quite well as to how many students have been delayed to join their universities. So this life is totally unsustainable, and Israel has to answer the ethical question as to how long could it ever maintain this longest occupation of modern times.
Well, Dr. Hosni Mubarak, let's take a look at the specifics of the Israeli cabinet decision. As far as we know, it is still not exactly clear. There is more goods are being allowed in, such as foodstuffs, milk, stationery is one of the items that is mentioned. At the same time, some construction material is allowed in that will be under the supervision of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, but there's no lifting whatsoever on the movement of people in and out of Gaza. There is no lifting whatsoever on the maritime blockade. That means that the people of Gaza cannot fish for themselves, and in fact, fish is brought through the tunnels into Gaza, despite the fact that it is on the sea. In view of all of this, do you think that the measures announced by Israel will satisfy the broader international community that was looking for some form of reaction to the ongoing crisis there?
No, they've already indicated from Washington, from Brussels, that they are interested and encouraged to see that the Israelis are revisiting their blockade policy, but they wait to see the details of how this will be implemented before they will pronounce on whether it's going to work or not and be sufficient or not to enable ordinary economic activity amongst ordinary Palestinians. The key point is that if construction materials are only going to be allowed through to projects run by the UN or foreign governments of which the Israelis approve, then that won't be sufficient to get the ordinary small entrepreneur, the lifeline of business and economic activity in the Gaza Strip, back into business.
Do you think, Ephraim Snee, that there is any possibility that Israel's self-defined security fears can be satisfied, and at the same time, for example, allowing freer movement of people in and out of Gaza, which is a critical point in terms of economic development?
Look, I have to reply to the comment of Sabri Saidam. We are not the advocates of the Palestinian people, definitely not. But we are the advocates of ourselves, and we have the right to defend ourselves against those who till now launched more than 3,000 rockets on our civilian villages. Nobody speaks about it. Nobody speaks about the plight of the Israelis on whose hand these rockets and missiles fell, and we have to make sure that ammunition, rockets, missiles will not enter to Gaza. Unfortunately, through the tunnels, many of this stuff comes in. And unfortunately, it's not in our hand to stop it, but it's the responsibility of the Egyptian government. But everything which comes by sea should be monitored by us, that no more rockets will be imported to Gaza and hit us the next night.
To get back to my initial question, Ephraim Snee, is there any way that Israel's security needs can be satisfied and at the same time allowing, for example, the free movement of people in and out of Gaza, which is utterly essential for economic progress there, which Israel actually says it wants?
So let's be very practical. The question is, who will control the passages? Who will control the checkpoints? I don't believe that Hamas will allow anyone to effectively control these passages. I believe that if you deploy their European police or whoever, whenever they will stop one of the activists of Hamas or the emissaries from Iran, they will attack the checkpost. How I know? Because they did it in the past. If somebody does not obey them, they will not allow him to be responsible of the checkpoints. That's the point. Well, no matter who will deploy there, they will be kicked out by Hamas. By the way, the same reason that they kicked Mr. Saddam out of Gaza. He speaks with us from Ramallah, not from Gaza. Why? Because if he will enter Gaza, the people of Hamas will treat him not in a very friendly way.
Well, let me ask Sabri Saidam. Let me bring Sabri Saidam in then, Minister Snee, which would be appropriate at this particular stage. And that is, we heard there from Ephraim Snee the issue of who controls those checkpoints, the flow of things and people in and out of Gaza. Now, the last formal agreement with Israel was 2005. That was an agreement reached by the Palestinian Authority. Do you still see that agreement as should be in place legally and that Israel is abrogating a legal agreement it reached in the past?
Yes, let me say that I was not kicked out of Gaza. I was the Minister of Telecom at the time Hamas won the elections and formed its own government. I handed over the ministry to Hamas at the time, yes. I left Gaza to work in the West Bank, and then I visited Gaza even after the coup that took place. So I was never kicked out of Gaza. What I'm saying is that the relaxing of the crossing, the opening of the crossing, and the relaxing of the siege on Gaza, and the total lifting of the siege on Gaza, will come under an arrangement of crossing arrangement that's to be basically brokered with the several parties, inclusive of the Europeans, and that the agreement of 2005 still stands as it stood in the past. And I believe maybe some justifications to why we need to modify it will be introduced. But if the openings are to come around, then surely there will be some sort of a formula that's workable formula, that's an accepted formula for the passage of goods in and out of Gaza. To continue under the slogans and the excuse that we cannot do such a thing because Hamas will be controlling the crossing is total nonsense. I'm sure if Israel moves and makes the gesture, there will be an arrangement on the part of the Palestinian Authority and on the part of the international community to secure the borders, to make sure that the right things are going in. But what we're saying is that this status quo is totally unsustainable, and the behavior of Israel is totally unsustainable.
Well, let's take a look at the sequence of events that led us to what we're discussing now. The aid flotilla that was attacked last month propelled Gaza back into the world's attention once more. It appears that even more international flotillas are set to do the same, despite Israeli insistence that it will maintain a maritime blockade on that territory. Iranian charities announced last week they will be sending ships to Gaza. Lebanese organizations have sponsored 2 vessels, including an all-women ship, the Mariam. 2 of the organizations who led last month's intercepted flotilla have said they will send more ships. The International Humanitarian Fund has said it will send 6 more ships to Gaza in July. The UK-based Free Gaza movement is planning another convoy of 10 to 15 ships due to set sail in October. And a German organization, Jewish Voices for a Just Peace, is sponsoring a ship due to depart in July. Dr. Rosemary Hollis in London, do these organized flotillas, the potentials, the planned one, do these actually have an impact? Do they help or hinder the people of Gaza ultimately?
I think what we've just seen demonstrated with the flotilla led by the Navy Marmara is that yes, indeed, it has shocked the international community into recognition that they have turned a blind eye to the situation of ordinary Gazans, in effect turned a blind eye. You get periodic statements coming out of the European Union about how the blockade is bad news, that it's punishing the wrong people, that they're worried about the 750,000 children in Gaza who do not deserve to be punished, whether Hamas is in charge or anybody else is in charge, and that this is not sustainable for the future. But they haven't actually done anything about it. And because of the crisis that emerged, triggered by the sailing of the flotilla, this has provided a moment of opportunity for everybody to make up for the mistakes of the past. The European Union actually would do things differently in the wake of the 2006 election that yielded a Hamas victory if they had their time over. They don't want to admit a mistake, but they now very much want to see sufficient cooperation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and the officials on the ground, including some Hamas officials on the ground in the Gaza Strip, sufficient cooperation to get something resembling normal life back to the Gaza Strip. Otherwise, they are party to choosing one Palestinian leadership over another at the expense of 1.5 million Palestinians. And that is not sustainable in terms of European public opinion.
Well, Ephraim Snee in Tel Aviv, let me put the earlier question to you, and that is, does Israel see these threats of flotillas on their way as a further threat of greater international pressure in the months ahead?
I strongly believe that we would be able to fend off this kind of pressure. It's very cynical. It tries to use the real suffering of the people of Gaza in order to maintain the Hamas regime alive and to allow it to continue its control over Gaza. There is one thing that I can for sure tell you it will not be allowed is to ship into Gaza materials and stuff which can strategically and militarily serve the Hamas.
Well, Sabri Saidam in Ramallah, let's have a final and brief word from you.
Well, I would say two things. First, the flotilla had uncovered a major point that we need to point out repeatedly as Palestinians. If the citizens of 40 countries were treated this way, imagine what Israel has been doing to the Palestinians over decades. Second of all, I think the flotilla ought to have been the Palestinian exodus of 2010, just like the exodus which the Jews have ran in 1947 into Palestine at the time. So I think let's go out of this discussion and focus on the future. The way Israel is conducting its occupation should not be allowed to continue. The occupation of Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem would have to be ended for Israel to live peacefully. And that the influx of supporters into Gaza, I'm sure you've seen them to be responsible adults. I'm sure the influx will continue if Israel's policy persists in Gaza. I think the international community ought to review the entire policy of how Israel is handling the entire Palestinian file.
Well, it's a debate that will be continuing in the days, weeks and months ahead. Thanks to our guests, Sabri Saidam in Ramallah, Ephraim Snee in Tel Aviv, and Dr. Rosemary Hollis in London. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.